everybody. Thanks for coming today, and to those of you online. My name is Maria Evans. I'm the Artistic Director here for the Arts Council of Princeton. And so we're an arts-based nonprofit organization, and we have galleries and classes and events and artists in residencies and community projects and a pretty robust public art program. And we just got a brand new website. So if you haven't seen our new website, it's artscouncilofprinceton.org, and we're pretty excited about that. We're here tonight to hear about interwoven stories. And this started as a community mini stitching project with our then 2016 artist in resident, which was Diana Waymar. And we can get to more details as she begins her talk. And then in 2018, we expanded to Interwoven Stories International, and we displayed that here in the Kaplan Gallery. And then this past winter, we opened it up nationally, and we're calling it Interwoven Stories, the Final Chapter, but I have a sneaky suspicion it might rear its head again, just from all the comments I've been hearing from people coming to the show. And today was really fun because we were busy all day long with people catching it for the last day. And Diana was very charming to agree to come back and give a closing talk. And so we extended the show by a week so we could have her here today with us and share some of her experiences and what she's doing now and what she's going to be doing in the future. So I'd like to introduce my now very famous friend, Diana Waymar. And thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thanks, Maria. Actually, I don't think you invited me back. I think I asked if I could come back. Yeah, Artists in Perpetuity. So I wanted to start, first of all, it's very strange to sit up here alone and talk about this project because it's really not about me. And what's behind me and on these walls, I think, is sort of the most interesting part of the project. And I think that it's important to think about how far it's come and how it came together, but really this stuff around me is the magic. So I'd like to thank Maria, my partner in crime, when we first got together in 2016 to reconnect. We'd known each other for years, but she was working with children at Princeton Young Achievers. I had stitched the John McPhee pages over here out of my grandparents' bed sheets. And we had a moment of sort of connection and realized that we wanted to see if we could interest adults and we could capture something about the Princeton community in 2016. And I guess whether or not we could really share our love for embroidery, if we could bring in people who hadn't stitched before, as some people were asking me before my talk, and then the people in the community who had a lot of stitching experience. So mostly it was a chance for Maria and I to see if we could create a community around this methodology. And I was reinstalling the project last month, and I realized that the first chapter, which I think was about 173 pages, I think I touched every single page in some way, whether it's Princeton Young Achievers and stitching, which are the ones down here with the trees and the plants and the leaves, stitching all the children's names, or meeting with the art therapist who was working at the hospital with an art therapy group, to all the different workshops that we hosted. And at that point, every page was sort of a labor of love. It was convincing people to participate. It was inviting them. It was helping them. To this final chapter, which I think the next one will be the meta chapter. I can just say that right now, and then maybe just like inviting myself back to talk, maybe it'll happen. But this last chapter was open to the public on social media, and the pages came in and I didn't see them until I installed them. So it was a little bit like, you know, raising a child and releasing it into the world. And I think the best thing about this project is that it no longer seems to depend on me or maybe even Maria, although I'm really dependent on Maria. And certainly had Kyle come on board, and I couldn't have done, you know, we couldn't have done this project without you and your participation. There's an amazing team here at the Arts Council, and I was asked earlier, you know, what was I going to talk about? And I said, well, I'm really just here to celebrate the Arts Council of Princeton, because this community and this Arts Center gave me a chance when I was, you know, was raising 4 children and moving around to, you know, in my 40s, to come here and to have a supportive community. And I can't tell you how much that means to someone who's restarting a career and trying something new. There are people who have been on the board that I know, the advisory board, people have donated printers. It's an unbelievable institution. So the fact that my work is now all mostly on Instagram and is international is really because of the work that I did here. And I think that it's kind of magical that it's still here, you know, that we can still come together in this way and do this kind of work. The first pages, what you're sort of, when you look around the room, this whole wall were the pages from the Arts Council of Princeton, and then recently the pages that we collected online from participants. So after the project was here, I decided to travel around with the project. And at that point, we weren't calling it Interwoven Stories International because we didn't know what would happen. The next chapter I did was at the University of Puget Sound. So if you look over in that wall, there's a section in the middle that's University of Puget Sound. On the upper right are pages that were done by children in an art space, not unlike the Arts Council of Princeton in Damascus, Syria. I met an artist at an international peace building conference, and she said, I love your project, and I'm going to do it with children in my community. Upper left corner, trans and gender diverse teens in Victoria, British Columbia. The Petty School did the project. And then the third row from the bottom going across are pages from Zen Hospice Project. And I was thinking today about this project, and at the time when Maria and I were thinking about the prompt and what would inspire people to stitch their stories into the pages, I was using a kind of UNESCO cultural mapping prompt. You know, what spaces are important to us? How do we locate ourselves? What makes something a community? What are our memories? And I realize now that this project is sort of like the narrowing of an hourglass, because there are pages that are behind me. There are pages that are in time. I don't mean physically, and then there are pages that are new. And then there are pages like Zen Hospice Project that represent something that is no longer here. I was their last artist in residence. I don't think it was my fault they closed, but anyway, and that building and that Zen Hospice Project started in response to the AIDS crisis. It was a guest house where people could go and people could die peacefully with care and compassion and dignity. And, you know, for a variety of reasons, things come and go, and it's closed. So now when I look at those pages, I think of that closed chapter and how sad that makes me. And yet, there are those pages, and if you look at them closely, they're done by hospice volunteers who talk about sitting with a patient as they're passing. There's a very simple page over there that says, you know, may I sit with you? There's another one that says, I will miss loving you, that was done by a nurse at the hospice. And I don't know what that page means, and that's part of the mystery of the project. Sometimes I know the stories and sometimes I don't. And then there are participants whose pages are here who were no longer with us. So a project that was about mapping has become a kind of map. The last chapter that is behind you is the chapter from Nantucket. And that was a sort of open project for the entire community. And there are a lot of really interesting pages from that chapter as well. And I think when I look around this room, I'm struck by how familiar these pages are and then how unfamiliar they feel sometimes now, 6 years after I started the project. There's a page here about gun violence. And I think if you walked in, you might think that that was a page that was made recently, but that was a page that was made for the first chapter. And I think that that is a very interesting sort of overlapping theme of these pages, is that they're both of a certain moment and then they're also not of a moment. They circle around as we sort of circle around. So I'd like to take questions and you know, I don't know what you all know about the project and what how many people here are participants in the project? Yeah, okay. The rest of you, you can still participate in the meta chapter. But I would really love to sort of hear your questions and thoughts. For me, a lot of this project is about what everybody sees and feels when they look at these pages. And that's been an incredible gift for me as somebody who started out doing this alone. Yes.
Where did you get the idea for the line paper, the school type?
Yeah, the stuff that, sorry. Oh, sorry. The question was, where did I get the idea for the 3-whole line paper? I think if Maria and I had really consulted before that, she might have said, let's use blank paper, because who needs to put all these lines on? But you can't, you know, retrofit a project. I love that paper. You know, my children no longer buy this, you know, the ream of paper before they start school. I love the paper. I love John McPhee, and I took his writing class at Princeton. And so the first pages I did are over there. And for those, I just felt like it had to be on notebook paper. That just seemed appropriate for John McPhee's instruction and the craft of writing. And then I love the pages. I mean, I still, Maria has 3 blank ones over there that hopefully people will sign out and make new pages, but it's just so nostalgic. It's so perfect. And I wanted the uniformity to just be Tiny Prigs Project, which is a totally different thing in some ways. Someone asked me earlier how the projects compared, and I said, well, Interwoven Stories, it's like you have 2 children. This is the introvert, and Tiny Prigs Project is the extrovert. And, you know, one is screaming and throwing a tantrum all the time, and the other is like, can I just stay back here? So it made sense to me that the pages were all the same. If you were going to start with the idea of a community, let's all start with a blank page. Now, I was criticized at one of the talks, it must have been Interwoven Stories International, because in other countries, the paper looks different. It's actually more like graph paper, I think in Germany. Yeah. My husband knows, but also, as you'll see from the pages that were made in Damascus, of course, the pink line is on the right. You know, the lines go like this. This is a construct. And then another friend of mine said, when I got school paper, you know, I think she was in France, she said, it was really prized. Like you took really good care of it. You didn't just sort of scribble on it the way she thought, you know, North American students sort of use it as scrap paper. And then of course there's the implied nostalgia, because we don't have this paper around very much anymore. So I knew it would sort of put a timestamp on the project, but you'll see, of course, in the pages, the people are referencing social media. There's a page here that someone from the Arts Council did of a Zoom meeting during COVID. Do you know who did that? I feel like, I'm sorry, I don't remember who did pages anymore. I used to, but there's a page of a Zoom meeting. Now that would not have existed in 2016. I mean, maybe Zoom meetings existed in 2016, but that gives you a sense. You guys found it? Yeah, right there. There it is. So it's, you know, it's creeping in. It's keeping up. Yeah. Anyone else have a, yes?
What's going to become of this as it gets bigger and bigger?
Well, starting tomorrow, we're going to start scanning all of these pages to make a book. And that does sort of create puts a sort of beginning, middle, and end on this version. But what's going to happen to it? it's going to, like Tiny Bricks Project, which is over 5,000 pieces, it's going to grow and continue until there's some performative reason for it to stop. So with Tiny Bricks Project, I said it was when Trump was out of office. But then, well, you know, he left in such a dramatic way, I had to extend it to include an insurrection. And then it's sort of like he never left. And so I think I don't know the answer to that, because it didn't begin to address a specific thing. It just began to sort of experiment and see if there was a need in the space for it. So it was a question in our minds, would people participate again when we opened it up again this year? Would they spend the time? These pages are donated to the project. These are not pages that anyone's going to get back. And that's a really big ask, I think. It's both a big ask, but it also sort of guarantees that they're going to be kept and taken care of. So there are a couple of exhibits that we're planning, and I hope it'll just keep growing and keep sort of celebrating the spirit of what started here at the Arts Council. When it goes to other places, anyone who's had a connection to Princeton will say, I remember this place. I ate at that restaurant, or I got a brat Edith's, or, so you see, it doesn't, many experiences at Edith's. That's one of my favorite places. But as long as their memory is being built, I think it'll just keep growing. And then, you know, I'll keep asking to come back here, and every couple of years I'll come and harass Maria and Kyle and Melissa, and they won't answer my emails for a while, and then they'll have to. And I'm like, it's time to make more pages. So.
More people will have a chance to see these original works.
Yes, the collection will not be sold. It will not end up like, I think it's the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where the art, you know, everything goes in the basement and doesn't get seen again. It has not moved on to Instagram, which is where Tiny Pricks lives on Instagram. And I think that's a really interesting difference between the two projects, because the Tiny Pricks project is being curated sometimes hourly, but certainly daily. And you can, it's such a different kind of feed, but the medium is the same. The methodology is quite similar. So maybe this could speed up in some way. The pandemic had an impact on Tiny Pricks project, which is that people were at home, and they were looking at the materials around them, and they were stitching, and they were making things, and they were separated from loved ones who had left them with textiles. And they were also pretty upset about what was happening politically. So either that project was going to shut down, or that project was going to grow a lot. So I don't know what's going to happen. And that's why these projects, public art projects, are responding to sort of a public need. You could adapt this project in many different ways to collect many different narratives, whether it was, you know, in any particular political issue. Hey, Jessica.
If you can scan them, would you ever make a physical collection that would be one contained physical collection, not as they are
Yeah.
right now, maybe like in some kind of
Yes.
if you will.
Yeah. I mean, I guess a 3D, yeah, right. So the question was sort of around how to create a book out of these, and whether or not the pieces could be recreated in some way as a physical collection, or an accordion book, or a quilt. That's always the temptation when you have fabric with both Tiny Pricks and this project is could it become a quilt? And for me, with both projects, once it's a quilt, you're fixing that narrative. You can't rearrange the text. And so I really like the freedom with this project and with Tiny Pricks project to retell it. It's like those fridge poetry magnets. And I don't know, but I agree with you that there feels like there should be something that sort of brings it together into a space where it fits. I will say that there are 20 pages that belong to the municipal hall, and they go outside of the courthouse. And the idea was, you're probably usually not sitting outside the courthouse for a good reason. Like, there's probably something that's making you feel a little anxious. And we thought that having these fabric pages outside of the courthouse would be this nice softening. That space, Liz was sort of saying, like it's very big and it's marble and it's kind of imposing. What if there was something sort of warm there? So in that case, it is sort of to counterbalance the architecture and the reason that people are sitting there in that bench waiting for their appearance. So maybe there's spaces that could go. Hospitals are a natural, I think, a natural fit. Yeah, but if anyone has any ideas, I'm always curious to sort of, it would be amazing to duplicate these pages. Yeah, I know. It's kind of, and curating them is very hard. We were going to install them all on sheets for this exhibit because last time we put in all these pins, you know, we had numb fingertips. I guess numb is better than feeling at that point. But the minute I got in this space, I said to Maria, we're going to have a change of plans and I'm going to put them back into the walls with the pins, because the most important thing about these pages right now is they move. They flutter and they're off the wall and they're against something that's hard. And with textile, I'm always fighting this idea that it stays textile. I want you just to look at textile at, you know, it could be paper, could be a canvas, just to look at the art object, not to think of it as anything other than this piece of art that is framed on the wall. And what I love about this installation is that it comes off of the wall and there's a shadow behind it and it feels, you know, framed, but it's also a grid. And that gives you some comfort when you're looking at it. But I've had people say to me that I've come in, you know, 3 or 4 times and I'm still seeing new things. I'm still seeing aspects of the project. I always tell people to come in alone because so many times people come as a couple and one of them's like, okay. Someone said to me that they observed a couple come in here and she finally said to him, go do something for a while and come back and get me because I want to read them all. And I think that's also, it feels to me like something that you can absorb in your own time. So it's really nice to have the project up for a long time. Yes.
I understand all the arguments against about what to say, but I remember very fondly the beginning of the wonderful lawsuit over that we had. And
this one?
I keep thinking, yes.
Yeah.
And I know it must be massively expensive to produce, but there ought to be ways that there could be volumes, and there could, you know, that we could do the funding and it could be a fundraiser. I don't know if there's any reason against that, but it seems to me at least those should be the free flowing, the physicality, you move it all around the country and the world, but to have volumes of this, really it's a treasure. Just seems, and I thought that's where some of the questions might be going.
Yeah.
And you know, it's so enormous. This would be a lot of volumes. That's what I was thinking about.
Yeah, thank you. I think about that too. It feels like it's not something that I can do at this particular moment. I was hoping you were going to volunteer because I was like, this sounds great. Let's talk after the exhibit. But we are going to do, Maria and I have been talking, we want to do a book from the beginning. I mean, they are pages. I think there's sort of a natural language. Also, when you give your page, you don't have it anymore. And to be able to give someone a book or to give someone else a book, there are participants here who've done 4 or 5 pages, and you have 5, 6? Yeah, 6 pages. So there are 6 books that I could, how many grandchildren? I think that there's yes, it's just all I have to say is yes. But again, I don't know when it's going to end. So I guess the idea of volumes is significant. But I think right now it's just a question of a person, resources, and time. You know, this is the Arts Council does a lot of things. And I don't know if, that kind of scope of book publishing would be possible at this moment, but we will do a book. Yeah. Yeah.
So you would provide a page, right? And was the instruction that the person could do anything?
No.
No? And was there any,
yeah.
Suppose someone was completely unskilled, embroidery?
yes, I'm just going to repeat the question for people who are watching. The question was, were there any instructions? What if people didn't have any experience stitching, right? Those are, yeah. So I included some very early pages that I had made over there. Some of them I sort of cringed to look at because they were so early, but I just wanted people, I was curious to see how my own work has progressed. I don't think there's anything, I don't think there is an unskilled part. There are, how do I put it? This is a medium that is so generous, and seeing the handwork, making the handwork visible is part of the project. So when you look especially at the Nantucket chapter, you see a real range because there are people who have spent a lot of time and stitching and have a lot of experience. But then there are people who have never stitched before. And I think they're equally beautiful. And I think that they work extremely well. When you see the struggle, you also see something about the participant and their desire to make something, to be inspired by other people. We had workshops, but to answer your question, we had workshops. We had a lot of support. Kyle's done, I mean, you could message her at any point, I mean, except during this talk, and she will volunteer, her time and her talent to help you. So there were a lot of people in the community who stepped in and said, let me help you. I've given workshops for both projects, where I'm threading the needle and I'm sitting with people, and mostly people start feeling comfortable with the medium. Some people are historically traumatized by it because they have bad experiences. It was a way in which, women were judged, I guess, and there's some things about it that make them tense. But once you start, most people really love it. In terms of the prompt and were there things you couldn't do? Yes. I mean, I used to say, like, you can't bedazzle the page and you can't dye the page. And because I was carting this collection around and I needed it to kind of fit together. But then somebody did a couple times and it was just so fantastic. So the rules were just there to be sort of broken. There's a Nantucket piece that has pieces of plastic and garbage that was picked up on the beach. And I was like, oh no. But then I was like, oh my, of course it makes sense. Of course it belongs. So there's no such thing as a page that doesn't belong. There's a page from the Nantucket chapter. It was a young woman that I had met at Quaker Meeting. It's sort of down there in the bottom in the center. She took out all the thread. She didn't have any thread with her. She took out all the thread that we'd use to make the lines on the page and then used that thread and restitched it in 2 circles in the middle of her page. So it's just, I mean, that's very meta. I'm not even, that's beyond me. So I had those rules. It's a little bit like, I don't know, you leave your kids alone for the weekend, they're gonna have a party. You say, don't do this, don't do that. Stuff happens and hopefully it's great. And honestly, I don't think there's a single page. There isn't a single page that we've ever said no, or instead, a lot of people like to go over the rules with me and I'm like, well, why don't you just try it and see what you think? But then a lot of people really like rules. It's helpful when you're sitting down to do something creative. It can be quite intimidating, especially if you've already seen an exhibit of pages and you're like, well, how will my page get along with the other page? No, not unless they asked. Yeah, did we? No, I mean, no, we didn't have kits but we sat with people and talked to them. We talked about their pages and we really just talked to them about their lives and what they were thinking about. There are different kinds of people. There are people who take a kit and they're like, I'll see you when it's done. And there are people who with whom you communicate a lot during the process, and both are sort of equally wonderful. Yes.
Just make a photocopy of each one of these pictures without any question for aesthetics. I'm just thinking of somebody 60 years from now that is standing above the world now. It would be a marvelous. I see somebody doing a PhD thesis. I mean, it just would be marvelous as a source of what's going on. And it's really important, I think. So I know the aesthetics are important, and I know the wonderful. It's also a source for somebody with regeneration.
So we should meet after this talk too. Oh, please. Sorry. So yeah, I just wanted to repeat. Well, it's hard. I'm repeating the question for people online. The question or the observation was that it would be nice, I think you're saying, to be able to preserve the history of these pieces, to make copies of them that would be. Yeah.
Literally, binders, probably 2 binders, doesn't have to be
Yeah.
glass, doesn't have to be anything, put it in your archive.
So we do that when they're all stored in binders, actually, because that's what paper goes in. And we do have color copies inside plastic sleeves, because when the pieces are loaned out, we need to have a record of the pieces.
You would already have what I'm saying.
Yes, we do have copies, but not available. The real tension with this project was, is it going to be like StoryCorps? Once Maria and I started to get in the pages, we're like, well, there's so much here. Are we going to collect oral histories? I mean, you're talking about a lot of Princeton history and now a lot of other history of Zen Hospice Project. And that was, that's still something that, I don't know, that's a hard one. You know, there's a page over there that says other. So I'm doing the grid. It's 4 up and 4 over. Rob, maybe you see it sort of in front of you. And there's a written statement for that piece. It's from the University of Puget Sound collection. And there's a form that this participant filled in school when she was a child, and it lists different ethnicities. And she was told by her teacher to check other, and that others often didn't amount to anything. I don't know how she'd heard that or who could have said that to her. So that was her page. Now I'm telling you this story now. The box is not checked, by the way. And then around the margins are these incredibly rich and vibrant designs. So each of these stories has an incredible story. And I know some of them, and a lot of them I don't know. And that was the interesting thing about opening this up, was the pages that came in. I think, Maria, some of them came with letters, but I didn't meet the people face to face. There are people in this room that I've spent hours with meeting and talking, and I feel like I know them. I think the stories are really important, and I think we did talk a lot about having a website and building in the stories and allowing people to navigate the collection and learn about. The Princeton Young Achievers pages were from the different PYA centers in Princeton. You know, there are people who have graduated from, you know, school and gone on. I mean, there are things that have happened to the participants. And that was part of, I think, what we were playing with by reopening up the chapter, was to see how the pages compared. What about the page you made 6 years ago? You know, not to single out Danielle, but it was here. But she has a page over there. There's a child with their hand outstretched. And then she basically duplicated the same image. And in the first page, of course, the child isn't wearing a mask. And then the second page, made 6 years later, the child has a mask on. So, you know, right there is sort of it's talking about the passage of time. And that's that kind of narrowing of the sort of hourglass that I think of. So I agree. And I think it's open and available for anyone who wants to study this project and do something with it. Yes, we are going to, I was trying to ask if we could do it tonight, but tomorrow, the Arts Council, we're going to start scanning them. And I have a feeling that it's going to be really interesting to see these as paper again, like actual paper, because sometimes people walk into this exhibit and they look at it very quickly and they're like, how did you stitch into the paper? Why doesn't the paper rip? So we're going to start scanning it tomorrow. And I think this, you know, scanner, the quality of those pages is going to be kind of amazing to see. And it's going to be interesting to see what it looks like to go back to paper. We're going to make a book out of them. We're scanning them for, yeah, a bound book. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, we do have, and I have all of those in the binder. The question is, yeah, how to include them. And you're right, people could send in whatever they wanted to with their pages. Some people sent in documentation. Cookie's page has a picture of her mother with the tortoise, George. And I think I know she sent in a copy of that original photo that could go with it. So we have that documentation for some of the pages, and people have, yeah, written about it. So maybe that's part of the, you know, website or that kind of documentation. We went back and forth before this exhibit about whether or not we would have binders in the middle of the room that would have that documentation. But the work that Melissa did just to get this sort of index up and get people's names up it was a lot of work. So again, it comes down to a little bit sort of using the resources that we have here, you know, maximizing those resources for the particular exhibit. But you're right, we did collect stories, and we do have, you know, some of the narratives. The exhibit at the Municipal Hall has a binder with people's stories in it. So that is actually a place where you can sit and read about the participants. Yeah.
How much of the whole project are we looking at here?
The question is, how much of the whole project are you looking at here? This is all of it. Yeah. Every page, except for one. Somebody here has brought in a page. So there's one plus one. And Rob, you counted them for me at the opening, 300 and
470-ish.
470-ish. Yeah. So 470 pages. Yeah. Yes.
I'm curious about the order.
Oh.
So how did you determine the order of pages for this exhibit, and what other options for the order are you considering, or did you consider it?
Oh, this is such a great question. The first thing I had to consider was how high to go, because I'm short, and I had to think about the walls, and I wanted to have all the pages from the Arts Council of Princeton chapter in one wall. And we really went back and forth, and some people were like, well, you know, usually the art is all around, and you go up the stairs, and I wanted just the wall. And then I go by legibility. So I didn't go for content. I went for accessibility. So you'll see in this middle section are the pages with dense amount of text. And then hopefully you can read going up, going down. And then, you know, I wanted all of Anne's 6 pages to be together, which they are over there. There are families that are together. There are families. There's a family that did 4 pages for the first exhibit and did, I think 2 of them did pages for the next exhibit. So I wanted to clump those together. There's a series of sort of portraits right here. So if you look at it, you'll see that there are hints. Both of Kyle's pages are together. You know, there's sort of a theme-ish. And then the other thing is that if you want to keep a kind of, you want the eye to travel, I separated the pages that had a lot of density of color, because otherwise a lot of the pages are mostly white, So you want, when you walk in, to not have a section pop out. You want people to feel like they have to find their own place within the project. So if I put a dense number of pages together that were all one color, you would just gravitate visually to that section.
But in a book.
I know. I'm going to be doing that tonight. I'm really excited. I'm going to be figuring out how to, you know, curate these pages. What kind of story can I actually tell? Do you do all the places that used to be in Princeton? Do you do pages about travel? Do you do pages about birds? There are a lot of pages about birds. Do you do pages, you know, clump all the pages about flowers together? How much of it can be like a graphic novel where you actually there's a connection between the pages? And then how much are they, you know, is it unexpected? How random can it be? There are lots of different ways to look at it. I think that's going to be the really fun part. And the challenge will be to have all of them, you know, get as many as we can into the book form. Yeah.
Any more questions?
Yeah, or if anyone participated and has anything to, you know, wants to share anything about the process, or, you know, also, yeah, I am.
Just when I felt that I was almost greedy about the project, because I was not a sculpture, and yet I know things, but all I could think of was a horrible cross-stitch presence that you get in third grade, you know, and didn't want to do. But
yeah,
once I saw it was the paper that got the idea of the paper. I knew what to do, you know what to do, piece of paper. And it was very exciting to me since I, you know, in my head I've written the first page of every novel that ever existed, but it doesn't go beyond the first paragraph.
Yeah.
And the idea of telling a story on something that I understood was just amazing to me. And when I, not being a stitcher, nobody cared what the back looked like. And when I didn't know what perspective was, I sort of had to ask the high school kid, you know, and I knew it wasn't even do it, but it was freedom, and something I just said not just. So that's why I just sort of went to it when I had the opportunity. And, I'm now doing one for outside question for a 100-year-old who was a librarian in her profession, and I'm finding library quotes. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I have 3 weeks to do it, but it's just giving me an outlet that I just didn't know existed. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I mean, Anne's pages are over here, about 4 rows up to the left, and I feel like your first page was My Nassau Street. So you were, you know, originally quite connected to the memories and
Once you said that, I only think of my childhood.
Yeah.
You know, and so I can find that one to the block I could navigate from kindergarten to 5th grade at Nassau Street School, which is now 185.
Yeah, where I studied in college. So
Exactly.
yeah.
It keeps on.
Yeah.
But that block is something that actually had a camp store, a peanut store. It had Bella's, a dress shop. It was a drugstore. I mean, it was a world.
Yeah.
For a kid who, you know, I was on the farm outside of town, so the world. So it just gave me a start. That was my beginning when I wanted to go. But when I see what the extent of imagination is fascinating to me. I think other people have done it that felt that same freedom.
I think so. I hope so. I mean, your comment about the backs reminds me of Jessica's question about an accordion exhibit. It would be kind of interesting to exhibit it where you could see the front and the back, because the backs are just, there's a lot of information there. I think it's awesome. You don't know but speaking of front and backs, there's a page over there. Catherine May, there's a figure, and she attached and made little clothing that's on little eye hooks that you put on it. And there's a pattern on one side of that clothing, there's text on the other. So even that has a front and back. You're right. I mean, who could have thought of that? I mean, that's.
My grandson just studied her.
Oh.
Like 10 seconds with me.
Yeah.
Before he said, I can't believe it. As his brother was just a few days ago. And as they read through these things, and both of them, of course, at their age, stunned by that one. You know, I try to point out to them fine points of it, but they saw the
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting taking dragging 2 boys.
Yeah.
So it was different in the age groups.
Yeah, so younger people, the Princeton Young Achievers groups, they just sat down and started stitching. And I have also done workshops with 20-something-year-olds at the Wing in New York, and I thought, well, they'd be interested in this medium. And their approach is to sort of, oh, here's an interesting thing you're offering. And they sit down and they engage. And then they start talking about a grandmother or an aunt, or somebody comes up who did this kind of work, and they were reminded of that. There's a page over there that's from the Cottson Library of a tree. And so this in the beginning, Maria and I were really desperate to get pages. I mean, I think we would have done anything for a page. And people were like, well, I have a sketch. Milo's mother came and she said, I have this beautiful drawing he did, but he can't stitch it. So I stitched it for him. And then he came to the opening and he walked right in and he went over and he said, that's my page, and it's the best one here. And I was kind of waiting at this recent opening, like, where's Milo? Was he going to come? What was he, 7 or 8 when that happened? And what I loved about that is that was his page. He didn't stitch it. And I've had other people who say, well, I didn't stitch all of it myself, or I had, and it's his page, even though now I don't extend that offer as often anymore, but I'm really glad I did his page because it's a really awesome page. And his drawing was awesome. So children have this incredible perspective that's really worth sharing. One of the things Maria and I thought about a lot with this project was how to include the subject matter, how to make it sort of make sure we included a lot of Princeton. You know, how could we capture all these different places and people and things that we were thinking about. So there were also volunteers that would stitch pages and helped with pages and helped each other. So I think Maria had one page that traveled between 3 or 4 people in this round. Where is it? I think it's the Witherspoon Jackson page. Neighborhood here went from person to person, right? I mean, and so in that sense, it does have some of the language of a quilt that the community gets together, they share, they make these pieces together.
People really also love the transportability of this. You
Yes.
just grab it, throw it in your bag. I would always talk to people, well, I'm going to be on a plane and I'm going to start my project, or I'm on a train, or I have a car trip coming up, or I'm going to the library for a couple hours and just grab it.
Yes, that's a really big part of this media, both with this project and Tiny Pricks project, because I was finding myself when I was in art school, you know, sitting at the squash courts in different places with my kids. And, you know, you can stitch almost anywhere, and it was really portable.
Do you have something on the table?
I do. Yeah. I've been told, my kids said to me recently, you're always working. I'm like, yeah, but I'm sitting here with you. I'm present. I'm stitching, but I'm present. That's really important. Time is important. I mean, that's what you're seeing here also is not just talent, but time. And how much are you going to give to someone else? How much everyone's time is valuable. Everyone is busy. Not just Paul Muldoon. I had asked him for a quote and he emailed back and said he didn't have time. And so I stitched his response. So, you know, everybody you can squeeze time. That's what someone said to me. A friend of mine said, I'm always trying to steal time. And this is a way to steal some time. Because if you actually make a page, you find that you do have time. It's kind of amazing how that works, I think, if you're committed. Yes.
So how much time did it take you to sew the grid onto the white fabric?
These pages? The question was, how much time does it take to make a page? Maria, what's the latest? I mean, it is speed stitching on a machine, so.
Yeah, I did like about 10 of them, and I just decided, oh my gosh, I have some help. And so we had lots of volunteers, and we did like 50 batches of 50. And I think one of them had a record of 51.
10 minutes? Yeah. Kyle, what's your record?
Like 15,
15, 16. So Kyle has an instructional video also on how to make, you know, she's an incredible resource and has a video so you can make it at home, the pages at home.
If you stitch fewer lines.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That was a big debate. Yeah, these are the kind of conversations we had in the planning. Well, how many lines is it really going to have? How tight, how close are those lines? Oh, I'm sure they're really far apart. That looks like a page. Yeah, it is a lot of work, but once you start doing it, you can do it. Yeah, it just takes a little bit of time. Yeah. Yeah, Maria did. Yeah, quite a few people did. Yeah, that was important for this process, for this most recent chapters, that people could make their own pages, because there was a small fee for the pages this time. When we did the first chapter, there are pages that didn't come back. So that's a lot of time that you put into making those pages, and not because anybody, you know, they're hard, you lose them, you put it away some way, you don't finish it. And so we wanted to make sure we could support the project when we did it again. And I think some of the ones that are done at home, when you go around and look, the pages don't stay uniform. First of all, when you stitch into them, they tighten. It depends on how tight your hoop is. They really kind of morph. There's a page there with very dense stitching, and it really kind of warps the sides, right? There's just, Kyle, I think your page stayed pretty square, but it starts to shrink. Yeah, there's a kind of weight that the page has, and this kind of buildup of thread that really changes the page. And then some of them have the threads left on them. Maria, I see yours does. Some have the 3 holes in them, some don't. So yeah, you know, they look the same, but they're not the same. Yeah. So I think that's, unless there are any more questions.
Melissa, did we get to all the online questions?
Do you have the question, and maybe we can address this again? Is,
Yeah.
Are there any plans for this collection to travel again?
Yes, I can't announce them yet, but sorry, guys. The question is, are there any plans for the project to travel at the moment? And the answer is yes, we have some ideas, but we don't have anything that we can confirm yet. But if people are interested in exhibiting the project, they should absolutely contact us, because and the other great thing about this format is that you can pack it up and ship it anywhere, and it's relatively easy to transport. So yeah, I wish I could tell you, but just follow the project and we'll announce future exhibits. Yes. Yes, the question was, have any other communities expressed an interest in replicating the project? With both of my projects, the word replicating is interesting. There's just stealing the idea or copying the idea or incorporating the idea. And I, at times, have felt protective of the projects and the sort of intellectual property and have gone briefly down that rabbit hole. And it turns out that's not a rabbit hole I want to go down. I don't think we've been approached by anyone to do a chapter, but I just think it's a public project with a pretty open methodology, and we would welcome new chapters. I mean, essentially in Damascus, of course, that was with permission, but that chapter was done entirely, you know, by the team there, and then the pages were contributed. So, you know, at this point, I feel like the more the merrier. But we've thought about approaching different institutions to see if we could do it more formally, and maybe with the book, when the book comes out, we'll do that and see where it goes. It would be pretty amazing to connect it to, you know, universities or to different organizations, especially right now. There's a lot happening right now, right? It feels pretty intense, I think, for most people. Yeah. Yes, hi, Philippe.
So obviously, this is such a beautifully curated and intimate expression of this work. And I'm curious with Tiny Pricks, what your experience has been with Instagram and how that is for you on a daily basis, managing that. Do you have help? Are you getting photos of pages and things on a daily basis? And what does that look like for you?
So the question was what Cindy was asking about Tiny Pricks project, because it really lives on Instagram, and what the experience, I think, is of that kind of pace and that kind of exhibiting and that kind of interaction, which is very, very different. And do I have help? I think I probably need help on a variety of levels. That project is, yeah, that project grew so quickly. It's hard to believe that such a slow medium can become so big, but that project grew very quickly, not just in followers and in number of pieces, but also in the energy around it. And whenever something difficult or bad happens, there's a huge amount of energy around the project suddenly. And that is the most difficult part of that project, and one of the ways that is the most different. If there's a tragedy, if there's a mass shooting, if there's certain things are overturned, you know, there's just suddenly this huge energy on social media, and it needs to go somewhere. And even textile is slower and softer, and it's taking text and making an art object out of it. There's still a lot of energy, and that comes sometimes right in my direction. And I think I try to just stick to the stitching. I mean, it is therapeutic. You know, Louise Bourgeois said that, you know, the act of sewing is a process of emotional repair. And I think that is true. But it is very different. And I am still working with it and figuring it out, because it's so live. and where I get my news now, if it's from Twitter, it's before it's been officially reported on. So how quickly do you get ahead of the news, and how, can you confirm a source? And it becomes what we're all facing. You're all reading and I'm stitching, but I'm still, we're all there sort of together trying to process something that quickly. This has a very different feeling to it, I think. It's much more.
Is it hard to
Yeah.
just post everything? If someone sends you something.
Yes.
Because I can imagine that must be tough sometimes too.
Yes. Do I? Yes. Yes. Yes to all of that. Yeah, so many yeses. So the question was, do I post everything? Do I curate it? How do I, with Tiny Pricks Project, where there are over 5,000 pieces, how did that project work in a public function? Because this project, you make a page and it's going to go on the wall. I mean, there isn't a page, Maria, right, that we haven't put up. We were asked sort of in the beginning, like, what if there's a page that's really challenging? It's open to the public. With Tiny Pricks Project, there are only a few pieces that I haven't posted, and it's often because someone has become confused about the source. So there was a quote, it was attributed to Trump, and it was something like, if I come home and dinner's not ready, I'm going to do this and do that. And this amazing participant had stitched this whole thing and then realized that it was a South Park quote. It was like a parody. So the parodies cause a lot of trouble because that particular presidency was an ongoing parody, and that's really hard. But I know we have some Tiny Pricks Projects participants here. Danielle, did you find it hard to find quotes and source them, or no? Yeah. Yes, I am. Yeah, I'm mainlining it all. Yeah, so I'm just, that's very true. There is a lapse. So the hardest thing with Tiny Pricks Project is what I can't stitch. At this point, people message me and they're like, why aren't you stitching this quote? This is really important to me. Why aren't you, quote unquote, talking about this? And I was like, well, I'm trying. I can't stitch. And so that's when, it's still open to the public, although I haven't officially kept it open because there were so many pieces coming in. Every piece is opened, it's put in the index, it's ironed, it's posted, and then each post often has a write-up. And so the work of the project became, it was drinking out of a fire hose. But having said that, I think I've posted practically every piece. I think that's really important. How many followers? Hopefully still as many as I had before this talk, but I don't, 94,000. The followers is an interesting thing because I remember when I hit 10,000 and my account was deleted for some reason for almost 24 hours. You were with me that night, and that was horrifying. That was something that this project has not faced, because Tiny Pricks Project, the documentation was on Instagram. Each one of those pieces is a lot of information. It's not just the post, it's when it was posted, what people said about it, how many people liked it, how many people shared it, about that participant, what were they feeling and thinking when they made it. And when the account disappeared, I had lost all that information and data around that piece that existed in this certain moment. And I remember lying awake that night thinking, okay, well, what if a fire had burnt down the physical collection, which is sort of worse, like what I sort of considered the material record that we were creating of the Trump presidency, because there's not going to be a Trump library. Actually, there might be a Trump library, like a library, golf course, casino, buy some steaks and pillow. Who knows what he's going to create, but there isn't that sense of a library. So at least I felt like I had something that I'd worked very hard on, and so many people, hundreds of people at that point, had contributed to. So there is a question of preserving. What are you preserving at this point? This is easy to sort of discuss more or less what we're preserving, but with Tiny Pricks Project, when something is on social media, there's a totally different feeling around preservation. And I always thought that Trump would himself delete his Twitter account because it would be incriminating. That was sort of part of the reason I started stitching Trump quotes, because I went from this to Trump quotes, which just feels like really different materials, so to speak. But it never occurred to me that he would be taken off of Twitter. And then I was like, people were like, are you really upset? I was like, no, I'm not so upset. I mean, I'm conflicted about that actually, that whether or not people should be kicked off of Twitter, but no, I wasn't too upset because he just kept saying things anyway. And then all these other people around him, you know, I just think it sort of spread. And so there was always material. So it's impossible to curate, really. I try. Yeah.
Well, also on social media, to this gentleman's point, the difficulty of putting it all together. In social media, you have all the meta stuff of the likes and the reposts and the comments.
Yeah.
And the exchanges between people. It's really hard to try to capture that on another.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the comment was that it's very hard to capture all the metadata around posts on Instagram. And I don't think we're quite, I don't know what the, you know, I still think of it as art. So that's why I had the physical collection of Tiny Pricks Project, is that I have that object. A lot of public art projects that are on social media, the individual retains the object. But I'm still kind of old fashioned. And so I have, in an undisclosed location, I have, you know, 5,000 pieces. So I think, you know, to address that issue, I feel like at least I have that. And I'm not sure what it means to have a physical art collection anymore. It's harder and harder for institutions to maintain and preserve textile. And I've talked to the director of the AIDS Quilt Project and the NAMES Foundation and different institutions. It's difficult to preserve, you know, 5,000 pieces. And everyone says, well, what about the Smithsonian? Well, the Smithsonian is frantically, I'm sure, collecting things right now. There is actually a lot of material coming out of, you know, this time period, even though we're spending so much time on social media. Their protests, their masks. Just think about these objects. You know, we were doing a project about an object, and then suddenly people were making masks. And on Tiny Pricks Project, participants were making masks to send to people long before masks were being worn by everyone, because they were just like, oh, I can make, you know, I can stitch and I can make pages and I can make a piece for Tiny Pricks Project. I can make a mask. And they pivoted to that. And they were sending, you know, asking me to share that they would send masks to any nurse or doctor that asked for masks. So there's a lot of activism that comes out of that community. Yeah. Okay, I think we should let
everybody coming. And I was just going to say that I noticed some overlaps between Tiny Pricks and this time around.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about this piece in particular because this
Yeah.
was, wasn't that a person who
Yes. Yes.
and sent them
Yeah.
box loads?
Yes.
They would travel around to that flea market and get handkerchiefs and mail them to Diana for the Tiny Pricks Project. And I got very excited and made a page and wrote this whole letter and sent in postcards about that.
This participant had discovered that there were two sisters who spent a couple decades traveling around the country collecting hankies. And on each hanky, they would stitch the date and where they had collected the hanky from. Yeah, a pin. Yes. Yep. Where the hanky was from. So yeah, they're interwoven. You're also reminding me that a lot of people have used Tiny Pricks Project in a really wonderful way to embed their family textiles into something that is going to be preserved. So I get boxes of gloves and hankies and baby clothing and then really, really important family textiles. Like there's a brownie sash that somebody sent in with all these badges on it. It says, it's about Jeffrey Epstein, that says, you know, Trump saying of Epstein that he liked them on the younger side. So when you find a textile and a quote, there's a powerful magic because the memory materials can say a lot. And just like these pages, though they're blank pages, I think they say a lot. If you walked into this room and you saw this project on, you know, a bunch of different colored fabric and different, you know, fabric from Michaels or where, you know, it's a very different, conceptually a very different experience. And so this taught me that the textile was extremely important. And with Tiny Pricks Project, it's really open. So I don't know what I'm going to get. I mean, with that project, I said like no bras and no underwear. But of course, of course, I just felt it's hard to transport bras and underwear. Hankies are small, but when there's a quote and somebody's got a textile, you can just feel their inspiration because they may have saved something for years. During COVID, there was a participant whose mother was a master quilter, and she had taken her mother to her nursing home and knew that she wasn't going to be able to see her mother in person for a long time. And she went home and took all the scraps from her mother's quilts and created a piece for Tiny Pricks Project and then sent it in. They're just, yeah, they're textiles that I'm really honored that people share with me because they're extremely personal. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for coming, everybody. Thanks.